Scope 2015 in Florida.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm talking about the features, the small little features, probably nobody will tell you about, because it's not just about universal theme, it's not just about page designer and all the other cool features. There are a number of small features within Apex 5.0, and you might have seen it on the schedule. There's another presentation by Dietmar Aust following my session in Atlantic number 2. We tried to not overlap with the features I'm showing you, so you might also want to check out his session to really get a big picture about the small little features, and I know he has really some cool small features in his presentation. Safe harbor statement in the case if I'm talking about future direction, but what you might also have already noticed is I'm not David Peak, I'm Patrick Wolf, one of the developers of Apex, and I'm with the Apex team since 2009. I'm responsible for plugins, for the advisor, for the application search, and also I'm one of the developers of the page designer. And Austria is close to Australia, but it's in a different part of the world, let's say it. Yeah, so I'm from Vienna, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, Patrick Wolf is my handler, and on InsideOracleApex.com on my blog, I try to start again doing some blog postings, especially in the area of plugins. You can find a series of different blog postings highlighting the different features. So if you want to know more about plugins, which I'm highlighting here in this presentation, please have a look at the blog postings because they are going into the details. But let's get started. I think one nice area of Apex are the supporting objects. It helps you to make your application installation independent of other installation scripts, so you can bundle everything up within your application, and when the application is deployed to a different system, to a production system, it will automatically install your packages, your tables, and so on. And one great enhancement within Apex 5.0 was, because in the past, when you used that feature and you created your packages, your tables, you had to export them, you had to create scripts, you had to upload them as shared components, and now it's a lot easier because you can just grab the data from the data repository. It will be packed up in your Apex application, and when you are going to install it, it will be available. Let's have a quick look how that looks like. I'm logged in my Apex environment, standard Apex 5.0 on our development, on our cloud. And if I go into our sample application, you will find the supporting objects. If you install our packaged applications, you will see that all our packaged applications do use supporting objects to install the tables, the packages. So it might be a good hint for you to have a look how those installation scripts look like. But let's try to create our own. So I'm going into supporting objects, installation scripts. And if I delete this one here, that's a cloud environment. The network sometimes isn't that fast here because everybody wants to do something. You know what? I'm just switching over to my local VM. Looks like somebody is putting a heavy load on the internet connection here. Going into supporting objects, installation scripts, and if I go ahead and recreate my sample installation script, so I create a script, but this time you base it on a database object. You can give it a name. And then you can specify for all the database objects you're looking for. Do you just want to include packages? Do you also want to include triggers and tables and so on? In our case, we're just interested in the packages. And in the next step, you will see all the packages and package specifications which are available in your workspace and in your schema. So let's pick our sample database package. And you can pick multiple packages, as you can see with the shuttle. The big difference to what you're used to if you're using the supporting objects and you're just uploading a file is that up here you actually see which kind of database objects are contained in that SQL script. So you should also not go ahead and modify that SQL script, because as soon as you're refreshing it, everything will be gone. So that's really just a generated script for you. Hit create. And I do now have my test package here. And you can also view it. Go to the script editor, have a look how it looks like. Let's assume we do add a new procedure in the body. Going to the body of the package, or let's just add a comment text up here. Save and compile it. And after you're done with your development and you want to deploy your application, you go into supporting objects again in our installation scripts, and then you have two possible ways how to refresh your database objects you have referred in your installation script here. You can either just check it here and hit refresh checked. It will read the data, and if we are having a look at the script, you will see that within the package body, it picked up my latest version of the package. And that applies to all the different database objects like tables, triggers, packages, views, and so on. So this can really speed up your deployment process, that you don't have to collect all your different packages, tables, and so on, and create the create scripts. You just create a script with the wizard, and the next time you just hit refresh. You can do that here too, if you want to do it in a script-by-script base, and you're done. And when you're installing the application, there has also been an enhancement. Oh, one thing I forgot. We do now support multi-user development for those scripts too, so you can lock your script so that nobody else is working on it while you're doing something. Might come also in handy if you're on a bigger development project. If you export your application, that setting is really interesting for you. That has been enhanced. Before you just had the option include supporting object or don't include. And now you have the option yes and install import automatically. When is this used? So in the past, if you had a production system where you don't have, where you just have a runtime only installation, where you don't have the builder, it was not possible to install the supporting objects. What you can do now is, if you define here, while you're exporting it, import automatically, and you run that export script of your Apex application in SQL+, it will immediately automatically install the supporting objects. So if you have a quick look, in my installation here, if we go to supporting objects, before, or I already exported the group calendar application, which I had, which will create a number of new tables and packages. And if you use the command line to install that, so that's my F108 SQL script, which contains the export. And if I go into SQL+, connect as my schema user, try to zoom that a little bit in. As you might know, because I have exported it before from a different workspace and a different Apex installation, I exported it before from my cloud environment, and here is now my local VM. I have to tell Apex, hey, now it's a different workspace, and you have to take care of that. That's actually documented in our release notes, and there is this package called Apex Application Install, which you have to use to set the new workspace ID. You have to tell it that it should regenerate the IDs and so on. But that's documented. If you have a look in our API documentation into Apex Application Install, there you have a number of examples depending on your situation, if you switch between workspaces, if you have different systems, or if you just install it in your current workspace. And actually, there is also a new API, Apex Application Install, set auto supporting objects, where you could override the setting, what you have specified during export. So you could turn it off, that on the command line, it's not installed automatically, just as information. And if we run our application, it's quickly installed. And if we have a look in our object browser again, we will now see that there are a number of EBA_CA tables. So it has automatically been installed for us. So this is really handy in the case if you have really a production system, which is runtime only, and we encourage you to do so. So to just reduce the footprint of possible security issues and security attacks, you shouldn't have a development environment in your production Apex installation. And the same is also true for the instant administration, which is also very important, that there are nobody can log into your instance administration. Yep.
So you said supporting objects, installation scripts, and then database objects, but I don't see the database objects.
I just created a number of tables, or in that case, a number of tables have been created.
No, I mean when you're building the supporting objects.
So just going back to, if we go into this application and supporting objects, what it actually did with the wizard I was using before is that based on my database object I have selected, it did an export and created this script down here. And that's the script which is getting executed when you're installing the application. Yeah, if anybody has questions during the presentation, please ask. Yep.
Is that good for upgrade as well? I mean, regarding
Supporting object installs supports new installation and also upgrade scripts.
So for package and triggers, I understand. What about tables and data?
So in the case of tables, it's a little bit more complicated because what we're exporting here is a create table script. So it's not or it doesn't know how your previous state or the state on your production system is. So it's really, for create tables, it's simplistic. It's really just a create table statement. If it's a new table, it would work fine. But for existing table, it can't upgrade your existing tables. In that case, you have to create your upgrade scripts manually. You have to do your own alter table, add column, and so on.
And as well for metadata, I mean, if we have lookup tables and stuff like that, and we want to...
It really just, it's about DDL statements. It's not about insert statements and so on. You will have to create that manually. Again, we don't know what are your metadata tables, what are your live data tables, and so on. But maybe that's an enhancement for the future to actually specify, hey, that's a table which just contains configuration information, and we will just export that as insert update statement or delete statements.
In that case, when there's an upgrade and the tables have to be altered, can the scripts be manipulated to add that piece of the code that is required to alter the table?
As I said, with the if you have to upgrade the existing data model, you have to write your own alter table statements. So you would create a new script for that.
But can we include it in the package?
Yeah. So it wouldn't be here in this one script what I have here. It wouldn't be in my test. You would have a new script which just contains your alter table statements. So just an information there, if you don't know supporting objects, there are different areas of supporting objects. If you're doing a new installation, you would use the installation scripts here. If you're preparing for an upgrade, you have the upgrade scripts. So in that case, you already know you're in an upgrade situation, so you just run your alter table statements. And you can actually put conditions on those files. So depending on your environment and different settings, to execute them or not.
Patrick, we have another question coming in. Does supporting objects only work for the default parsing schema, or does it also support assigned parsing schemes?
Good question. So in general, if the parsing schema has the right to create a package or a table in that other schema, it will be fine. But if not, it will just be restricted to the privileges of the parsing schema. Yeah, that was the API I was telling you before, Apex application install, set out to install supporting object where you can override the export setting, as it is with all our other settings if you're installing an application export on the command line. Another small enhancement is this export with original IDs. When will this be used? If you're exporting your applications into a version control system like Subversion or a Git or whatsoever, in the past it was, if you wanted to use the diff functionality of this version control systems to find out what has changed between version A and version B, and you were in the situation that the application was installed into a different workspace which generated new IDs, you couldn't diff those two files because in the export file all the IDs would have been different and you wouldn't have been able to find any difference because there are so many differences. And now with this export origin IDs set to yes, which will probably remove in the future release of Apex and always export it with the original IDs because I think that's what most actually want to have. We try to keep the IDs as they have been before, so you can do the diffs within your version control system. So that should make it a lot easier to find out what has been changed in an application. Another interesting feature, and I think quite a number of developers have already had issue with, is you're sending out the email and you want to, and then you're including a link to your application. And when the user clicks the link, his existing session is invalidated. He's prompted again for username, password, and nobody's really happy. There have been a number of workarounds and solutions how to bypass that. But with Apex 5.0, we do now have support for that out of the box. So what you can do is for specific applications, specific pages, you can say that it's okay if somebody is calling the application with just the application number and the page number and doesn't include the session ID, which is the case if you include a link into a mail, for example. It's totally fine. We will just grab your existing session, if there is one, and join you together so that the other tab you might have in the browser will not be invalidated, and I will just show that in a second. Before you can use that feature, so by default, we just allow that for public sessions, because as long as you're not logged in, there is no need to actually have this kind of security. You will have to enable that on an instance level. So on the instance level, there is the same setting as you can see here, disabled, enabled for public sessions, and enabled for all sessions. In that case, you have to go into the instance settings and once enable it to enable for all sessions. And then on an application level and on a page level, you can specify your behavior. What I would suggest is that you really limit it to those pages you're referring to from an email. So don't open up all your pages of the application, just do it on a one-by-one base. Because what does this rejoin session actually mean? If you have a hacker, currently you're protected by the session ID because that's something the hacker cannot guess. If it's injected in some other web page, like let's say in Facebook, there is a small JavaScript code which tries to find out if you have an open tab in your browser where you're logged in into your internal application and where you can send me a lot of money, for example, and that hacker knows about that because he did some social engineering and he knows that you're always going to this page and so on. For him, it was not possible to to hijack that session or this tab where you have been logged in because he didn't know the session ID. With this feature, as nice as it is for usability if you're sending out emails and rejoin it with your currently logged in session, this could be a vulnerability threat because now the attacker doesn't need the session anymore. And that's why it's easier for him to actually hijack an existing session where you're logged in. Please have a look at the online help, which explains that in more detail. And I think it's even in our online documentation where we're going into when you should use rejoin session and so on. In that area, it's also interesting to have a look at deep linking. Deep linking is used in the case if the user hasn't been logged in yet and he's prompted for username password. If he is redirected to the page you told the user to, so for example in the email you have a link to page 10 and he clicks it, he's not logged in, he's typing in username password. Rejoin deep linking tells Apex, should we put him after the login on your main screen, so for example page 1, or should we actually redirect him to the page you have specified? When would this be used, or when would you want to prevent that? Sometimes within an application you have a complicated flow and you have to set, depending on the pages you're navigating to, you're setting your application items, you're setting your page items, and if somebody is able to directly navigate somewhere deep within your application, that could bypass a number of logic you have defined. And with this deep linking, you're telling Apex, can you do that, or does everybody have to go to the main screen of your application? Yeah. There's an application setting, there's a page setting, and an instance setting. So also an instance level, you can specify if this is allowed or not. And if you have a quick look, just to demonstrate that, I have here my application. If I run it, and let's just to demonstrate that it's doing it in a different browser. So I'm prompted. Everything works fine. If I do the same in a new tab, where I just specify application ID and page number, again, I'm prompted again. And if I do something in my original tab, oh, I have to do it again. So that's the experience what you have if somebody sent out a mail, for example, with a link to your application. So how can we modify that? I'm just having a quick look if here on my virtual machine I do also have this already enabled. So you go into Manage Instance, Security, and here you will find the setting to enable it for all sessions. So this has to be set once by your instance admin. And if we go into our example application, page 1, it's a page attribute setting. It's in the security area where we have, by default, it's using the application setting, but for now, I want to allow it for this specific page. If I save it and go back into my Safari, log in here, and if I can just pick here the application ID and the page number, you will see that I'm not prompted for my credentials again. And if I go to this other tab, navigate around, I'm still logged in. So now it's really simple in the case if you have to send out emails, or if you want to support some URLs that users are not logged out anymore, if they're using a bookmark or something like that, have a look at this Rejoin Session feature. But keep in mind the security aspect of it. And especially if you're sending out URLs for your current application, those APIs are interested, especially the Apex Mail Get Instance URL that will provide you the full URL for your application. So it will automatically know your domain name and so on, so you don't have to hardcode that within your application.
Does that take into account when you're using a web proxy?
There's an instance setting where you actually specify that URL, so that will be independent of any reverse proxies or so. So there's an instance setting where you specify this instance URL, and that one is used and returned by this function. One other thing which is interesting is prepare URL, especially if you send out something, and most of the time you're using it to focus on a specific action he should provide, like a specific record. You should enable session state protection. And with session state protection, you normally you are normally getting a checksum, which prevents that somebody can go there. And with prepare URL, if you generate your URLs yourself, you will get the checksum too. Yes?
So, Patrick, we often are sending emails on a background process that is scheduled and it's outside of Apex context.
There it's a little bit more complicated. I think there are some OTN forums postings out there where you can initialize an Apex session context so that those functions do work, because it shouldn't be, there has to be some security in place so that anybody can call those APIs to generate valid checksums. So that's why I would have to have a look. Maybe I can include something here in the slides to point you to OTM posting where we highlight how you can authenticate in a non-Apex session. But by default, it's just working out of the box in an Apex session, so if you're doing it in an Apex context. Another small feature, but again in the area of security. And if you upgrade your existing applications to Apex 5.0, all the checkboxes will be set because of backward compatibility. That enhancement was, I think, actually something out of a security presentation here last year or the year before, where one of the hackers demonstrated if you have a SQL injection in your application, they actually use that SQL injection in your application to modify the metadata of your current Apex application to install a backdoor. So what they did is they added a process to your login page to log and send the typed in passwords. So they were not so much interested to get the data of your application. They actually wanted to have the user and password login credentials from your application. And that's something we figure out there has to be a way, and most of the time you don't need to modify your existing application. That's why we introduced this application setting to prevent that APIs like www.flow API create page item or create process don't work if that flag is not set. Actually, the first API and all those in the www.flow API packages are not supported by Oracle, but we do know that customers have created applications to generate their own applications based on whatever. So that's used by a few customers. But the other settings like modify other applications or modify workspace repository, that's, for example, used in the case if you have a self-service application where you create new users or user groups and you use the Apex application create user and create user groups APIs, you would also be able to prevent that within the context of your applications. If you don't need that feature, somebody could call those APIs to create his own user, for example, on the fly. Another small enhancement in the area of error handling procedure, you might have already noticed in all our packaged applications, we do have an error procedure, error handling procedure that's used to beautify the error message sometimes is generated. So if you go into your application, edit application properties, and you go, and you go down to this error handling part, you can specify a procedure which is called every time an error is raised within Apex. This could be a validation error, this could be an Apex runtime error, and so on. And if you used our template, which is documented in our API reference guide, over time, you might have noticed that you got a cryptic error message like an internal error has occurred and users didn't know what was happening. But it was just because we added a new runtime error message to the Apex engine to highlight something like the ones we have here with Apex authorization, access denied, and so on. And so that you're not playing a catch-up game with each release we are releasing and you have to modify your error handling procedure, we have introduced a new flag which tells you, is it a common runtime error of the Apex engine? So instead of having a hard-coded list of error message the Apex engine might raise, you just check for is common runtime error, and in that case, so in that case, actually this should be a not. I'm just seeing it here. So if it's not a common runtime error, then it should be, your error message should be masked because it might expose security relevant information you don't want to expose to every user and especially not to hackers. Another small feature which we introduced, I think, just a month before we released, and Shakib wanted to have that, and that's why you have it now. And I think it's a small, nice feature. As you can see, fav icons, that are the small icons you see up here. There was no time anymore to declaratively expose that as an application or user interface setting in the builder, but you can define, as for now, and hopefully in a future release we expose that as an attribute set, as an application attribute setting. You just create a substitution variable called app_fav icons, where you specify some text. If you have a look in our packaged application, you will see that every packaged application does have an example, and you can grab that and use it, for example. If you declare it and have in your page template call placeholder called fav icons, it will be displayed up here, what you have seen here. So using that, you can show nice small images for your application so that they don't use the default, I think that's the default icon we are using if you don't specify it. So we have improved that icon, but sometimes you might want to have your own.
Is it part of the basic templates that come into the system?
If you're using universal theme, it's there out of the box. And I even think for the existing themes you're using at your application, we added some code to automatically migrate those and add those, that placeholder. But I was not 100% sure, that's why I added it here in the presentation if it doesn't work as expected. And actually, I have done a blog posting about that, so if you want to have more details, please have a look.
Patrick?
Yeah?
Someone asked me, Marcelo asked me earlier, when you're looking at a list of apps as icons on the builder, some apps have an icon. Is it using the app, the file icon? Or
currently not, because in the end, you're just specifying here a list of, or you're just specifying HTML code, and we can't really use that in the builder. We have to think about if that's something we can enhance in the future to show it in the builder. But the issue always is if we're displaying something in the builder, a developer has specified somewhere, you have a potential vulnerability for cross-site scripting attacks. So we have to be really careful within the application development environment that we actually show or render markup which has been entered by a developer. So that's why we have to have a look if there's a really secure way to do so. One feature, which is already there, I think, since Apex 4.0 or 4.1, but which is enhanced with every release, is the application upgrade wizard. Most of you probably have never seen it because you will just see it if you import an application from an old system. But if you just upgrade an existing instance, you're never will see it. And if we have a look what you can do with that, with Apex, we are introducing a number of new features every time, but you have to go into the different components, like with the pivot functionality of interactive reports. You have to go into each and every interactive report to enable that. But with the application upgrade wizard, you can do that on a much broader, with one wizard, and you can go over all your pages. It can also be used, for example, to convert all your existing Flash charts into HTML charts. So there are a number, depending on your application, you will see, so that's called in the utilities, application upgrade. And based on the application I'm in, I get a list of possible feature enhancements which can be applied to your existing application. In our case, we want, for example, to convert the existing theme-based calendar to our new CSS-based calendar. So if I run that application, the group calendar, as you can see, it's using the old list-based, or the old template-based calendar. And it's as easy as going here, specifying that just for page 1, for example, I want to upgrade that calendar. And if we run that page again, you will see you have the new controls of the CSS-based calendar with the weekly, monthly, daily view, and so on. So it's really easy to leverage those new features we are adding with each release, like, as you can see here, with subscription, pivot. We can automatically remove your is not null validations, because I think since Apex 4.0 there is a flag that you can set is required, or your is state checks and so on. So just have a look at your existing application. You might be able to modernize your existing application by just calling that wizard. What's new in SQL Workshop? We have modified SQL Workshop to use the new some of the new 12c features, like identity column. where you don't have to specify a sequence anymore. It will automatically be generated for you. So if you create a new table or modify an existing table, you can specify the identity column here. That will just be visible if you're using 12c. So in a 11G release database, you will not see it. Another feature we have introduced is data reduction, where you can mask your existing data depending on the different conditions. So if you just have a quick, or actually my local one is an XE system, which doesn't expose that, because again, it's a 12c feature. If you modify existing column, you will see a new area called data redaction, and you can specify those policies. If you want to use it, your schema does have to have the DBMS redaction privilege, that package, so that you can actually use it within SQL Workshop. So you have to grant it, or a DBA has to grant it. What's new in instance administration? There are a number of features there. First of all, and I think that's something you should do immediately if you're coming back or if you install Apex 5.0, go into instance administration, security, and have a look at your setting for the checksum hash function. You should set it to most secure. If you're upgrading an existing instance, then it will, if I'm not completely wrong, use the previous value what you had in that system. So that's why you should have a look and set the most secure on. What does it do? Depending on your database version, it's using the most secure checksum algorithm for your checksums, for your password hashes, and so on. That's why, depending on the database version, please pick most secure, and we will do it automatically, or pick something manually. When is this used? It's used for all the checksums Apex is generating, like you're doing session state protection, or you have the bookmark functionality available. And if you use bookmarks, we are not able to automatically invalidate your bookmarks, because if we would do that during the installation of Apex 5.0, all your users will scream up because all the bookmarks are not working anymore. So to pick up the most up-to-date hash function as you have specified it in the instance setting, you have to go into your application, into the security settings, check out what you have displayed here, and then you have to hit the expire bookmark. For example, if you see MD5 there, you should think about clicking on this expiry bookmarks. You probably get all the blame for that all the bookmarks are not working anymore, but you should really try to have as secure systems as possible. So just have a look, and probably want to expire the bookmarks. Another small feature in the instance administration is sometimes it's good, depending on the system, that you don't expose too much information if there is an unhandled error by Apex, for example, that you have some PL/SQL or SQL code is not working, like in a report or in a process, and you don't actually want to expose that to the end user, because a hacker might be able to use that information to try to bypass some security functionality of your application. In that case, you can change that to return just the HTTPD status of 400, and the end user will get almost meaningless error message like an internal error has occurred or something like that on the server. But in some environments, this can be interesting. Please also always have a look at the help text of those attributes. Another area which is quite interesting, especially in the case if you have a little bit bigger Apex installations with a number of workspaces and distinct applications, with the workspace isolation, which has been introduced in Apex 5.0, you can better separate different workspaces. Like in some situations, so you can do that on an instance level for all workspaces, and then on a workspace by workspace level, you can set different settings. So like, let's say by default, we only want to allow, let's say, 10 concurrent database sessions for a workspace, but workspace A is allowed to have 15 or even a lower number. When would you use that? Depending on your application, it could be that an interactive report, for example, takes 1 minute or 2 minutes to actually render because the SQL statement is so complicated. And then sometimes you have users that don't want to wait that long, and they think it helps if they refresh the page. And after 10 seconds, they think, let's do it again and do it again and do it again. And in the background, in the database, you're having hundreds of database sessions which are still running because they're executing the SQL statement. They don't know that the browser doesn't need it anymore, the information. And here, with those maximum concurrent workspace requests and concurrent session requests, you can prevent that one user is bringing your database down because he's spawning database sessions after database session. And with the concurrent session request kill timeout, you can even kill those sessions if the limit has been reached. So
What does the end user see?
in the case if you don't specify a session request kill timeout, he will see an error message that the maximum number of database sessions or sessions has been reached. In the case if you specify a kill timeout here, we will kill the old sessions automatically for you, and the current session which the user just requested will be executed. So just have a look. I think it's an interesting feature. And also resource consumer groups is interesting if you have the resource manager to set a resource group for different workspaces. Yes?
I'm just trying to think. So I thought I handled that pretty well in some instances just by putting the show processing on a button so that it can only be fired off once. I see some, I'm just trying to get my head out. I can see some potential issues with this. I guess this is something you have to kind of...
It's more of a brute force. It's really to prevent that one user or one bad-written application can bring down your database because it's creating database sessions after database session. Okay. So it's for denial of service attacks. It's really just to, especially on an environment where you have more than one workspace, where you have a hosted internal environment, to isolate the different workspaces and reduce the impact of it.
Yeah, so Patrick, I would recommend people use this all the time, every application, even with the show processing icon. With the show processing icon, browser dependent, the enter key will continue to hit that button even when the show processing is there. I've worked with many groups along with the Apex team that, sporadically, once every 3 months, their system would just come to a grinding halt. And in almost every event of this, it was this exactly.
And sometimes it's not just about submitting the page, it also could be an interactive report on a page where you requested with a refresh of your browser, and that's something you can't prevent. Another interesting feature is you can
Patrick,
limit...
what would be a good setting for that? Like how many concurrent sessions? That's
really up to your database. How many database sessions you can support if you have, for example, a resource group or resource manager in place. So, for example, if you have a resource manager in place, you can specify that after some time, your current statement is not getting as much CPU time anymore, so you throttle it down, 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 and then it might not matter too much if you have 5 active database sessions or 100 active database sessions, because it doesn't put so much pressure on your database. But that's really database depending on the number of CPUs and so on. Yes?
It's a 7 per person.
Great.
That actually, you use that in many, many places. 7 for an individual is a very good number.
For the session-based, for the session-based. So there's a maximum number of concurrent session requests, and that's true. I think one user, one session shouldn't have more than, probably 7 is already a lot, but shouldn't have more than 7 concurrently running database sessions at the time. Because you can have 2 or 3 because you're doing Ajax calls, but yeah, there shouldn't be too many for.
Patrick?
Yeah.
If you have timeout at Apex listener, which one takes the timeout?
So Apex listener also does have, you have a session pool and the number of database sessions.
Yeah.
Here with that, you have a little bit more control of the behavior, because with the session pool or a session pool setting of mod PL SQL or Apex listener, you can just set the overall total. So let's say you have 100 possible database sessions at one time, but on a workspace by workspace level or a user level, you have much more control to say, yeah, I don't want to wait till all my 100 database sessions are occupied by one user. It's probably better to restrict him after seven concurrent sessions. Yes?
Yeah, I just came up with a perfect example that we just ran into where this would work. So we had an application where accepted students were logging in at 6 o'clock on a specific date. We're talking 9,000 students, right, to see if they're accepted to the college. Well, what are they doing, right? 5:58, 5:59, 6, boom, 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 boom. So between 6 and 6:20, it just stopped. Then it started picking up. But this now I can see would be perfect for that.
Great.
I think at this, we probably want to set it to something lower than 7.
There you go. Reason to upgrade.
So there's another setting for workspace isolation that's for developers. How many files can be uploaded within a workspace? So you might want to limit that, and that not every developer can upload gigabytes of data in static application or static workspace files. You can do, and there's even a report to find out who is using how much space.
Is that for development or for production?
That's for development.
So you cannot, in production, you cannot limit the
In production, it has changed a little bit. Probably I'm not able to go there anymore. But in the past, all file uploads have been stored in this one table which contains all your files. Now with Apex 5.0, we just store them temporarily for your session. And that's why it doesn't matter that much, because as soon as your session is done, everything will be deleted.
No, but I'm doing application, loading attachment to my data.
That's right, but we say you shouldn't store it in the generic Apex file upload table. You should move your attachments into your own blob within your table. And if you do so, it's not something Apex can check, because that's something the database will do anyway. If you have a size limit on your schema, then you hit it at one point. And you can do the same for maximum emails, just to prevent that somebody is spamming and sending out emails, too many emails. That's on a daily basis. So if you specify here, for example, 1,000, then you can send out 1,000 emails from that workspace. You can also use real application security. Probably that's very advanced. Have a look at the documentation about that. You can now use that with an Apex application. And there are different monitoring settings if you want to enable activity logging for your application. Sometimes you might want to disable that on an instance level and not do this detailed which report, which page has been called, because that could also add load to your system. And you can also prevent that a developer can do a SQL trace, because all those kind of settings in a more hostile environment can be used as denial of service attacks, because those files have to be generated and have to be written somewhere. And if you call them often enough, it might fill up something and your database stops or something else bad happening. You can, for package applications, you can specify which authentications schemes can be used. For team development, you can now add attachments, and you have to enable that. That's something Dietmar will go into in more detail. One thing about declarative files, within Apex 5.0, we have added a number of places where you can add your JavaScript and CSS files now. In the past, you always had to modify the theme and add your own CSS and JavaScript files into your page templates. That's not necessary anymore. On a user interface level in your application, you can now specify the JavaScript files and CSS files which are specific to your application so that you don't have to touch the theme and modify it. And you can do that for template, you can do that for themes, you can do that for plugins, and so on. So there are a number of ways to actually just specify your URL, and we will pick that up without having to modify a theme. One interesting thing about themes, and that has already been covered by Hillary and by Shakib, themes are subscribed now out of the box. You can also use that for your existing theme. So if you have a master application and you create a new application, you can put a subscription onto your master application. So if you modify your theme, you just push it down to your application and all your applications are updated. In the past, you had to do that on a template by template level, which was really cumbersome. One other nice thing, which probably nobody has highlighted yet, if you go into edit theme, also in our theme 42, you can actually modify the icon libraries which are used by your application. So you can add your custom icon library. That doesn't require that you unlock the theme subscription. So you can make those kind of small modifications within your theme to add your custom libraries, which you can use in your own application. There are dialog defaults you can set, so which region should be used, which page template, if a dialog is created. And also one thing which is interesting and you might have not noticed yet, within Page Designer, we don't show region position 1 to region position 8 anymore. Instead, you get a region position called like sidebar, or you get a region position, button positions, and so on. And if you have a look at page templates and region templates, you can already do that for your existing applications. So if you go into your existing application, and let's assume you're not switching to universal theme, go into your page template and region templates and define display positions so that Page Designer can pick them up and make your development environment a little bit more friendly. You will also notice that in all the shared components where we do support subscriptions, we now show it in the overview report, so you immediately see that it's subscribed and where it's subscribed from. So that's also, I think, a small, nice feature. And probably that's the last one. Shared components are in authorizations. We do now have a new authorization type called is in group and is not in group. And you're able to reference your Apex user groups here, your Apex user groups. But you can also extend that by setting your own user groups. Let's assume you're not using Apex authentication. Instead, you're using Oracle single sign-on or some other single sign-on solution. And your user group assignment is also done in that system. So it's not done within Apex, it's done in this other system. Or you have your local, as I do have it here, my user group assignment table where you do the mapping. But how can you tell Apex that it should use those user groups which are in your own tables? You can do so in a post-authentication of your authentication scheme. You call this Apex authorization.enable dynamic groups, pass in all the user groups the current user does have, and then you can use this new declarative authorization scheme is in group to check against that. And we also support now groups within groups if you're using the Apex user group authentications. I will upload my slides. There are a ton of other features in there, especially also in the plugin area. And I would encourage you to also go to Dietmar's session, which is next door. He will show you more small new features. I hope you enjoyed it and have fun.